Maria's phone buzzed at 11 at night, and the name on the screen made her stomach drop before she even answered. Richard Kell. Her regional manager never called this late. Something was wrong, or something was about to be wrong. She picked up anyway, sitting up straight in bed as if he could see her through the phone. "Maria, quick thing before tomorrow," he said, his voice light, almost cheerful. "I booked the hotel for the trip. 1 room. No point wasting company money on 2 when we're only there for 2 nights." For a moment, Maria said nothing. She waited for him to laugh, to say he was joking, to correct himself. He didn't. "1 room?" she repeated, keeping her voice steady even though her pulse was racing. "Yeah, it's got 2 queen beds, totally normal for business trips. You'll thank me when you see how much the company saves this quarter." He said it so simply, like he was talking about ordering a smaller lunch, not sharing a hotel room with an employee he supervised. Maria felt her throat tighten. This was supposed to be the biggest opportunity of her career. 6 months of hard work, extra hours, perfect reports, all so she could finally be trusted to represent the company at a major client meeting outside the state. She had pictured herself walking into that meeting with confidence, proving she belonged in the room with senior staff. She had not pictured this. "I usually don't share rooms on business trips," she said carefully, testing the water, hoping he would hear the discomfort in her tone and simply fix it. "It's fine, Maria. Everyone does it when budgets are tight. I've done this with other people on the team before, no big deal." His tone shifted slightly, just enough to make her feel like pushing back would make her the difficult one, the one causing problems before the trip had even started. "We land at 9, meetings at 2. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." He hung up before she could respond. Maria sat in the quiet of her bedroom, phone still warm in her hand, replaying the conversation. 2 queen beds. Everyone does it. No big deal. The words looped in her mind, and each time they looped, they sounded less normal and more wrong. She thought about calling her older sister, Priya, who always had blunt advice for moments like this, but it was late, and Maria told herself she was overreacting. Maybe it really was normal. Maybe she had just never worked at a company where budgets were tight enough to justify this. She was new to this level of travel. Maybe everyone at corporate did this and she simply hadn't known. She packed her suitcase anyway, folding blazers and a spare blouse for the client meeting, telling herself that whatever happened at the hotel, she would handle it. She was 28 years old, capable, professional. She was not going to let one uncomfortable phone call ruin an opportunity she had worked so hard for. The next morning, the airport was crowded and loud, full of rolling suitcases and impatient announcements. Maria spotted Richard near the gate, scrolling through his phone, dressed in the same gray suit he always wore for these trips. He looked up and smiled like nothing had happened the night before. "Morning," he said. "Ready for the big pitch?" "Ready," Maria said, forcing a smile of her own. 2 other colleagues joined them at the gate, Daniel from finance and Alicia from client relations, both flying separately to meet a different client the same week. Maria felt a small flicker of relief seeing familiar faces, even though they weren't staying at the same hotel. "You excited?" Alicia asked, nudging Maria's arm. "First big trip with Richard, right?" "Yeah," Maria said, trying not to overthink it. Alicia gave her a curious look, but didn't push further, and soon they were boarding, the conversation drifting to other things, work gossip, weekend plans, nothing important. Maria used the flight to review her notes for the meeting, trying to focus on numbers and talking points instead of the knot sitting in her stomach. When they landed, the air outside felt different, warmer, thick with humidity. A car was waiting to take them to the hotel first before the meeting, and Richard chatted the whole ride about the client, about numbers, about how impressed they would be with Maria's presentation. He seemed completely unaware, or completely unbothered, that anything from last night's phone call still lingered in the air between them. The hotel lobby was bright and modern, with a tall glass ceiling and soft music playing somewhere in the background. Maria's suitcase wheels clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward the front desk behind Richard, her heart beating a little faster with every step. Richard reached the counter first. "Reservation under Kell," he said to the young man behind the desk. The clerk typed for a moment, then looked up. "I have 1 room here, sir. King bed, non-smoking, checking out Thursday." Maria's stomach dropped completely this time. She had held onto a small hope that maybe he had been joking, that maybe there would be two keys waiting for them after all. But there it was, confirmed by a stranger behind a desk, in front of her. "That's us," Richard said easily, sliding his card across the counter. The clerk glanced between the two of them, his expression neutral, but his eyes flicking toward Maria for half a second, as if silently asking if this was really what she wanted. Maria felt her face grow warm with embarrassment, though she had done nothing wrong. "Actually," Maria said, her voice surprising her with how firm it sounded, "I'll need my own room." Richard turned to her, his easy smile faltering slightly. "Maria, we talked about this last night. It's already booked, it's paid for. There's no reason to—" "I understand," she said, cutting him off gently but clearly. "But I'd prefer to have my own space. I can pay for it myself if that's easier." The clerk, sensing the tension, spoke up quickly. "We do have another room available, king bed, same floor. I can put that under a separate card if you'd like." "Yes, please," Maria said, already reaching into her purse for her wallet. Richard's jaw tightened, just slightly, the first real crack in his relaxed exterior. "You really don't need to pay for that. I'll just tell finance we needed an extra room for a last-minute change. It's not a problem." "Thank you," Maria said, "but I'd rather handle it myself." She wasn't entirely sure why she said it, except that something in her didn't want to owe him anything, didn't want the paper trail to say he had generously arranged for her comfort. She wanted her own name on her own reservation, plain and simple. The clerk processed her card, slid a key across the counter, and gave her a small, understanding nod that she appreciated more than she could explain. It was such a small gesture, but it made her feel, for just a moment, like she wasn't imagining the strangeness of the whole situation. Richard picked up his own key and forced a laugh. "Well, look at you, independent woman," he said, trying to make it sound like a joke, like teasing, like nothing uncomfortable had just happened in front of a hotel employee. "I was only trying to save the company some money. You know how tight budgets are this quarter." "I appreciate that," Maria said evenly, "but I think it's better this way." They rode the elevator together in silence, the numbers climbing slowly, the small space feeling smaller with every floor. Maria kept her eyes on the illuminated numbers above the door, counting down the seconds until she could step out and be alone. When the doors finally opened on their floor, Richard cleared his throat. "Meeting's at 2. Let's regroup in the lobby at 1:30. Work on the presentation flow one more time." "Sounds good," Maria said, already walking toward her room, her suitcase wheels clicking against the carpet. Once inside her room, she shut the door, turned the deadbolt, and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since the elevator. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room, replaying everything, the phone call, the front desk, the way Richard's smile had flickered when she asked for her own space. She told herself it was over now, that she had handled it, that she could focus on the meeting and everything would be fine. But some small, persistent part of her mind refused to let it go. It kept circling back to one thought, quiet but impossible to ignore. If this was really so normal, why did asking for her own room feel like she had just done something brave? She opened her laptop and pulled up her notes for the presentation, trying to push the thought aside. There was a meeting to prepare for, a client to impress, a career to protect. She could think about everything else later. But even as she practiced her talking points out loud in the quiet hotel room, a small voice in the back of her mind kept whispering that this was only the beginning of something, and she had no idea yet how far it would go. The client meeting went better than Maria had dared to hope. She stood in front of the polished conference table, walked through her slides without a single stumble, and answered every hard question the client's team threw at her. Richard sat beside her, nodding along, occasionally adding a comment, but for the most part letting her carry the presentation, which she took as a good sign. By the time they shook hands and left the building, the client had agreed to move forward with the partnership, and Richard seemed genuinely pleased. "You did great in there," he said as they walked back to the car. "Seriously, that was some of the best client work I've seen from someone at your level." "Thank you," Maria said, allowing herself a small smile. For a few hours, she had almost forgotten about the hotel room, about the uncomfortable phone call the night before, about the strange tension at the front desk. Work had a way of pushing everything else aside, at least temporarily. That evening, the two of them had dinner with the client's team at a restaurant near the hotel, a celebration of sorts for the deal coming together. Maria enjoyed herself, laughing at the client's stories, feeling proud of what she had accomplished. Richard was charming throughout dinner, refilling water glasses, telling jokes, playing the perfect picture of a supportive manager. It was almost enough to make Maria wonder if she had overreacted earlier that day. Almost. When dinner ended and they said their goodbyes to the client, Richard and Maria walked back toward the hotel together, the night air cooler now, streetlights flickering on above them. "Big day tomorrow too," Richard said, checking his phone. "Client wants to do a walkthrough of their office before we head to the airport." "Sounds good," Maria said. "I'll be ready." They reached the hotel lobby, and Richard paused near the elevators. "Hey, for what it's worth," he said, his tone suddenly quieter, more serious. "I didn't mean anything by the room thing. I really was just trying to save money. I've done that before with other people and nobody's ever made it a big deal." Maria studied his face for a moment, trying to read whether he was being sincere or simply covering himself now that the day had gone well and he wanted to smooth things over. "I understand," she said carefully. "I just prefer having my own space when I travel for work. It's nothing personal." Sure, Richard said, nodding quickly, though something in his eyes suggested he still didn't fully understand why it had bothered her so much. "Anyway, get some rest. Big finish tomorrow." They rode the elevator up together again, the silence less tense this time, though Maria still felt a small flicker of unease she couldn't quite name. When the doors opened on their floor, they said goodnight and went their separate ways, Maria retreating gratefully into her own room, locking the door, and changing into pajamas before collapsing onto the bed. She spent a few minutes texting her sister Priya, giving her a quick update on the trip. "Meeting went great," Maria typed. "Client loved the presentation. Feeling good about tonight." Priya responded almost instantly. "And the room thing? Did you get your own room?" "Yes, thankfully," Maria wrote back. "Paid for it myself. No big deal in the end." Priya sent back a string of question marks, clearly wanting more detail, but Maria promised to explain everything once she was home, too tired to relive the awkward conversation with Richard over text. She fell asleep quickly that night, worn out from the long day, the successful meeting, and the emotional weight of everything leading up to it. The rest of the trip passed without incident. The office walkthrough the next morning went smoothly. The client team seemed genuinely excited about the partnership, and by early afternoon, Maria and Richard were back at the airport, waiting for their flight home. Richard spent most of the wait on his laptop, answering emails, occasionally glancing up to comment on something from the trip. "This is going to look great on your file," he said at one point. "First big client trip, deal closed, client happy. You should be proud." "I am," Maria said, and she meant it. Despite everything, she had done well. She had proven to herself, if no one else, that she belonged at that table. By the time they landed back home, Maria felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The trip had been a professional success, but something about it had left a lingering discomfort she couldn't quite shake. She told herself it was over now, that she had handled the situation with the hotel room appropriately, and that she could move forward without dwelling on it. She was wrong about that. 3 days after returning to the office, Maria was refilling her coffee in the break room when she overheard 2 co-workers from a different department talking near the vending machines. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the office was small enough that voices carried easily between rooms. "Did you hear about the trip Maria took with Richard?" one of them said. "A woman named Carla from accounting." "No, what happened?" the other voice asked, belonging to someone Maria couldn't immediately place. "Apparently, he tried to book one hotel room for both of them," Carla said, lowering her voice slightly, though not quite enough. "Said something about saving the company money." "You're kidding," the other voice said. "That's insane. Did she say anything?" "I heard she pushed back and got her own room, paid for it herself even. But can you imagine? Your own boss trying to pull something like that." Maria froze near the coffee machine, her cup halfway filled, her heart suddenly pounding. She hadn't told anyone at the office about what happened, not even Alicia or Daniel, who had been at the airport with them but hadn't stayed at the same hotel. She had assumed the situation would stay private, a strange but resolved incident between her and Richard. Clearly that assumption had been wrong. She quietly finished filling her cup and left the break room without being noticed, her mind spinning. If Carla in accounting knew about it, that meant word had already spread through multiple departments. She wondered how many versions of the story were circulating, how twisted or exaggerated they might have become by the time they reached other people's ears. Back at her desk, Maria tried to focus on her emails, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation she had overheard. She thought about texting her sister again, then decided against it, unsure what she would even say. Instead, she found herself staring at her computer screen, replaying every detail of the trip, wondering if she had done the right thing by staying quiet about it internally, letting it become office gossip instead of something she had addressed directly. Later that afternoon, she ran into Denise near the printer, a woman from operations who Maria had always respected for her calm, straightforward demeanor. Denise wasn't in HR exactly, but she had worked closely with HR on several projects and always seemed to know how things worked behind the scenes at the company. "Hey, you okay?" Denise asked, noticing something in Maria's expression as she waited for a document to print. "You seem a little off today." Maria hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was nearby. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" "Of course," Denise said, her tone shifting immediately to something more serious. Maria took a breath and explained everything. The phone call the night before the trip, the hotel front desk, the way Richard had framed it as simply saving money, and finally, the conversation she had overheard in the break room that afternoon. Denise listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned as the story unfolded. "Maria, that's not okay," Denise said quietly once she had finished. "I know he tries to play it off as being frugal or practical, but that's not a normal request from a manager to an employee, especially someone he directly supervises." "I handled it though," Maria said, feeling suddenly defensive, though she wasn't sure why. "I got my own room. It didn't turn into anything." "I believe you," Denise said gently, "but that doesn't mean it wasn't a problem. The fact that you had to handle it at all, that you had to push back and pay out of pocket just to feel safe and comfortable, that's the issue. You shouldn't have had to do any of that." Maria felt a lump forming in her throat, the weight of the past few days finally catching up with her. She had been so focused on proving herself professionally during the trip that she hadn't allowed herself to fully process how uncomfortable the situation had actually been. "Do you think I should report it?" Maria asked quietly. "I don't want to make a big deal out of nothing, especially since the trip went well in the end." Denise shook her head firmly. "This isn't about whether the trip went well. This is about what he asked of you before you even landed. That matters, regardless of how the rest of the trip turned out." "I'm worried about how it'll look," Maria admitted, "like I'm causing problems or that people will think I'm exaggerating, especially since nothing actually happened at the hotel." "Something did happen," Denise said. "He asked you to share a room with him under the excuse of saving money. That's not nothing, even if you handled it well, and nothing worse followed from it. And honestly, the fact that it's already spreading through the office as gossip means people already sense something isn't right." Maria stayed quiet for a moment, processing everything Denise had said. Part of her wanted to brush it off, to move on and focus on the success of the trip instead. But another part of her, the same part that had insisted on her own hotel room despite Richard's pressure, refused to let it go so easily. "If you do decide to say something," Denise continued, "you should write everything down first. Dates, exact words if you remember them, any texts or emails related to the trip. Even the receipt from your hotel room if you kept it. It helps to have everything clearly laid out, just in case." "Just in case what?" Maria asked. "Just in case this isn't the first time he's done something like this," Denise said carefully, "and just in case it's not the last." The words settled uncomfortably in Maria's chest. She hadn't considered the possibility that this might be a pattern, something Richard had done before with other employees, something he might continue doing if nothing changed. That night, at home, Maria sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, a blank document staring back at her. She stared at the empty page for a long time before finally typing a date at the top, followed by a simple, factual account of the phone call from the night before the trip. She wrote slowly, carefully, trying to remember his exact words as closely as possible, resisting the urge to soften the language or make herself sound less affected by it than she actually was. She wrote about the front desk, about the clerk's questioning glance, about the moment she asked for her own room, and Richard's visible discomfort at her request. She wrote about the elevator ride, about dinner with the client, about Richard's quiet apology in the lobby that still hadn't fully explained why he thought his original plan had been reasonable in the first place. By the time she finished, it was well past midnight, and the document stretched across several pages. She saved it under a plain, unassuming file name and closed her laptop, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. She still wasn't sure if she would report it formally. Part of her hoped the situation would simply fade away on its own, that Richard would learn from the discomfort of the trip and never repeat the request with anyone else. But another part of her, quieter but persistent, suspected that people like Richard rarely learned lessons from awkward moments alone, especially when those moments ended in professional success rather than consequences. She went to bed that night with her decision still unmade, unaware that within days, circumstances would take that decision out of her hands entirely. The following week brought a strange kind of normalcy back to the office. Maria threw herself into her regular workload, catching up on emails that had piled up during the trip, joining routine meetings, and slowly settling back into the familiar rhythm of her job. The whispers from the break room seemed to quiet down, or maybe she had simply stopped noticing them, too busy to pay attention to hallway conversations that weren't directly about her. Richard, for his part, acted as though nothing unusual had happened at all. He praised her work in a team meeting, mentioned the successful client deal to senior leadership, and even recommended her for a small bonus tied to the trip's outcome. If he felt any lingering guilt about the hotel situation, he didn't show it. If anything, he seemed to have convinced himself that the matter was fully resolved, filed away as a minor miscommunication, rather than something that required any real reflection. Maria told herself she was fine with that. The trip was over, the client was happy, and her career was moving forward. She had the document saved on her laptop, detailed and factual, just in case she ever needed it. But she wasn't actively planning to use it. Life continued. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, everything shifted. Maria was walking past the small kitchenette on the third floor when she noticed a young woman sitting alone at the corner table, staring blankly at an untouched sandwich in front of her. Maria recognized her vaguely as someone from the client relations team, a newer hire named Grace, who had joined the company only a few months earlier. Grace looked pale, distracted, clearly somewhere else in her mind. "Hey, you okay?" Maria asked, echoing the same question Denise had asked her days earlier. Grace looked up, startled, then offered a weak smile. "Yeah, sorry, just tired. Long week." Maria hesitated, then decided to sit down across from her, unsure why exactly, except that something in Grace's expression felt familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. "I know we haven't talked much, but if you ever need to vent about anything, I'm around. New job stress is rough, especially with travel and client pressure." Grace gave a small, humorless laugh. "Travel's actually part of the problem, honestly." Something in Maria's chest tightened at those words. "What do you mean?" Grace glanced around the kitchenette, checking that no one else was within earshot, before lowering her voice. "I went on a regional trip last month with Richard Kell, first time traveling with him. He called me the night before, said he'd only booked one hotel room to save the company money." Maria felt her stomach drop, the familiar words landing like a physical blow. "He said the exact same thing to you?" Grace nodded, her eyes widening slightly at Maria's reaction. "Wait, did he do that to you too?" "On my trip last week," Maria said quietly. Word for word, almost. The two women stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of the coincidence settling heavily between them. Grace's shoulders sagged, as if some invisible tension had finally found somewhere to release. "I thought maybe it was just me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought maybe I'd misunderstood something, or that this was just how business trips worked and I was too new to know better." "Did you get your own room?" Maria asked. Grace nodded. "I made an excuse about needing quiet space to prepare for meetings. Said I sleep better alone before big presentations." He seemed annoyed but let it go eventually. I didn't want to make a scene since it was only my second month here. Maria felt a fresh wave of anger rising in her chest, sharper and more focused than the discomfort she had carried after her own trip. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an isolated lapse in judgment. This was a pattern, a script Richard had clearly used more than once, dressed up in the same practical, budget-conscious language each time, aimed specifically at newer or younger employees who might feel too uncertain of their standing to push back firmly. "Grace," Maria said carefully, "I think we need to talk to someone about this. Together." Grace's expression shifted quickly to alarm. "I don't want to cause problems. I just started here. I can't afford to be seen as difficult." "I understand that fear," Maria said, thinking of her own hesitation just days earlier. "But if he's done this to both of us, in almost the exact same way, he's probably done it to other people too. And if nobody says anything, he's just going to keep doing it." Grace looked down at her untouched sandwich, clearly torn between her instinct toward self-protection and the discomfort of staying silent about something she knew wasn't right. What would even happen if we said something? Would he just deny it? Would it be our word against his? "I actually wrote everything down after my trip," Maria said. "Dates, exact quotes as close as I could remember them, details about the hotel. If you did something similar, even just texts or emails you might have that show what happened, we'd have more than just word against word." Grace was quiet for a long moment before finally nodding slowly. "I have texts," she admitted. "I texted my roommate the night he called, complaining about it, saying I couldn't believe he actually suggested it." "That's good," Maria said gently. "That's really good, actually." Later that day, Maria reached out to Denise again, this time with more urgency in her voice. She explained what Grace had shared, careful to keep details vague enough to protect Grace's privacy until she was ready to come forward herself. Denise listened intently, her expression growing more serious with every detail. "This changes things significantly," Denise said once Maria finished. "One incident could be explained away as an unfortunate lapse in judgment, even if it shouldn't be excused. Two incidents, with nearly identical wording, involving different employees, that's a pattern. That's something HR needs to take seriously." "I'm worried about Grace," Maria admitted. "She's new. She's scared of being labeled difficult. And honestly, I understand that fear completely. I felt the same way after my trip." "That's a valid fear," Denise said. "But it's also exactly why patterns like this continue for so long. People stay quiet individually, each one thinking they're the only one, each one afraid of the consequences of speaking up alone. It's only when people compare notes, like you and Grace just did, that the full picture becomes clear." Maria nodded slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. She hadn't set out to become someone leading a formal complaint against her own regional manager, but the more she thought about Grace's pale, exhausted expression in the kitchenette, the more she understood that staying silent now, after learning what she knew, would mean allowing the same pattern to continue with the next new hire, and the one after that. "I think we need to go to HR," Maria said finally. "Both of us, together, with everything we have written down." Denise nodded in agreement. "I can help facilitate that conversation if you'd like. Make sure it's handled properly and taken seriously from the start." Over the next 2 days, Maria and Grace met privately during lunch breaks, comparing their experiences in careful detail, organizing their notes and messages into something coherent and professional. Grace, though still nervous, seemed to draw strength from realizing she wasn't alone in what had happened to her. Maria, in turn, felt a renewed sense of purpose, the discomfort she had carried since her own trip transforming slowly into something more like determination. They also learned through careful and discreet conversation with a few other colleagues that Richard had taken several other employees on regional trips over the past 2 years, though not everyone had experienced the same room-related pressure. It seemed, from what they could gather, that Richard's approach shifted depending on the employee, more assertive with newer or younger staff members who might be less likely to push back, more cautious with employees who had stronger professional standing or louder personalities. The realization only strengthened Maria's resolve. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment born from budget pressures, as Richard liked to frame it. This was a calculated pattern, carefully aimed at specific people who seemed less likely to cause trouble. On Friday afternoon, Maria and Grace requested a private meeting with the head of human resources, a composed woman named Nadia Farouk, who had been with the company for over a decade. Denise accompanied them, offering quiet support without speaking on their behalf, understanding that this was Maria and Grace's story to tell. Nadia listened carefully as Maria laid out the timeline of her own trip first, reading directly from her written account to ensure accuracy, mentioning the phone call, the front desk exchange, the clerk's questioning glance, and Richard's brief, seemingly sincere apology afterward that still failed to fully acknowledge why his original request had been inappropriate. Then Grace spoke, her voice shaking slightly at first before steadying as she described her own experience from the previous month, the almost identical phone call, her excuse about needing quiet space, and the lingering unease she had carried afterward without ever telling anyone at the company. Nadia took careful notes throughout, her expression remaining professional and neutral, though Maria noticed her jaw tighten slightly at certain details, particularly the near-identical wording both women described from their separate phone calls with Richard. "Thank you both for coming forward with this," Nadia said once they finished. "I want you to know this will be taken seriously, and we'll conduct a thorough and confidential investigation. In the meantime, I need to ask, do either of you have any documentation you can share? Texts, emails, receipts, anything that supports the timeline you've described?" Maria handed over a printed copy of her written account, along with the hotel receipt from her separate room, which she had kept in her wallet since the trip. Grace, after a moment of hesitation, pulled out her phone and showed Nadia the text exchange with her roommate from the night of Richard's phone call, the timestamp clearly matching the timeline she had described. "This is helpful," Nadia said, carefully documenting everything. "I want to be transparent with both of you. This process may take some time. We'll need to speak with Richard directly, and potentially with other employees who may have traveled with him in the past. I know that can feel uncertain, but I promise you'll be kept informed throughout." "What happens to us in the meantime?" Grace asked nervously. "Will we still have to work with him?" "We'll make arrangements to minimize direct contact during the investigation," Nadia assured her. "Your comfort and safety are our priority here, not just Richard's convenience." As they left the meeting, Grace let out a long breath, some of the tension visibly leaving her shoulders. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, "but I also feel like something might actually happen now, like it wasn't pointless to say something." "It wasn't pointless," Maria said firmly. "No matter what happens next, you did the right thing." Denise walked with them back toward their respective desks, offering quiet reassurance. "You both handled that incredibly well," she said. "I know it wasn't easy, but you gave HR everything they need to take this seriously." Maria nodded, though a knot of anxiety still sat heavily in her stomach. She knew formal investigations could be slow, uncertain, sometimes disappointing in their outcomes. She had heard stories, both inside and outside her workplace, of complaints that went nowhere, of powerful figures protected by their positions or their relationships within a company. She hoped, desperately, that this would be different. That night, at home, Maria sat at her kitchen table again, staring at the same laptop screen where she had first written down everything that happened during her trip. She opened a new document and began writing again, this time detailing the conversation with Grace, the meeting with Nadia, everything that had happened since her return from the trip. She wasn't entirely sure why she felt compelled to keep such careful records, except that some instinct told her this story was far from finished, and she wanted to remember every detail exactly as it happened, in case the coming weeks brought challenges she couldn't yet predict. Outside her kitchen window, the city hummed quietly in the darkness, ordinary and unaware of the quiet storm building inside the walls of Maria's workplace. She had no way of knowing, as she finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed, just how far this investigation would eventually reach, or how many other names would surface once people finally felt safe enough to speak. 2 weeks passed before Maria heard anything substantial from HR. The waiting felt endless, each day at the office carrying a strange undercurrent of tension she tried her best to ignore. Richard still came to work as usual, still ran his team meetings, still smiled and joked with colleagues in the hallway, seemingly unaware of the investigation quietly unfolding around him. Maria wondered, more than once, whether he had been informed yet, whether Nadia had already spoken with him, whether he suspected anything at all. She got her answer on a Tuesday morning when Nadia called her into a small conference room on the 4th floor, away from the usual bustle of their department. Grace was already there, along with Denise, who had been asked to join as a witness to the conversation given her earlier involvement. "I wanted to update you both on where things stand," Nadia said once everyone had settled into their seats. "We've completed the initial phase of our investigation, including a formal conversation with Richard about the concerns you raised." Maria felt her pulse quicken. "What did he say?" "Initially, he denied any wrongdoing," Nadia said carefully. "He described the room arrangements as simple cost-saving measures, consistent with his usual explanation. However, once we presented him with the details from both of your accounts, including the nearly identical language used in his phone calls, he became noticeably less confident in that explanation." "Did he admit to anything?" Grace asked quietly. "He acknowledged that he had made similar arrangements with other employees in the past," Nadia said, though he continued to frame it as an innocent, practical decision, rather than anything inappropriate. Denise shifted slightly in her seat. "Did you find any other employees willing to come forward?" Nadia nodded slowly. Once word spread that an investigation was underway, 3 additional employees reached out to share similar experiences from trips over the past 2 years. 2 of them had also arranged for separate rooms themselves, quietly, without ever reporting it formally, similar to what happened with both of you initially. Maria felt a mixture of vindication and sadness settle over her. Vindication, because this confirmed everything she and Grace had suspected, that this wasn't an isolated lapse but a clear pattern repeated across multiple trips and multiple employees. Sadness, because it meant several other women had quietly endured similar discomfort, each one assuming, as she once had, that speaking up wasn't worth the risk. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "The investigation findings will be reviewed by senior leadership, along with our legal and compliance teams," Nadia explained. "Given the pattern we've uncovered, along with Richard's own admissions during our conversation, I expect this will result in significant consequences. I can't share specific details about disciplinary outcomes at this stage, but I want you both to know that your willingness to come forward played a crucial role in uncovering the full scope of this issue." Grace exhaled slowly, some visible tension leaving her shoulders. "I keep waiting to feel relieved," she admitted, "but mostly, I just feel exhausted." "That's completely understandable," Nadia said gently. "This kind of process takes an emotional toll, even when it leads to the right outcome. I want to make sure you both have access to any support resources you might need during this time, whether that's time off, counseling resources through our employee assistance program, or simply someone to talk to." Maria appreciated the offer, though she found herself more focused on the practical aftermath than her own emotional state at that moment. "Will Richard know it was specifically us who reported this?" "He already knows you and Grace were the initial complainants, since we needed to reference specific incidents during our conversation with him," Nadia said honestly. "However, company policy strictly prohibits any retaliation against employees who report concerns in good faith. If you experience anything that feels like retaliation, whether subtle or direct, I want you to come to me immediately." The meeting ended with a plan in place. Maria and Grace would be temporarily reassigned to work directly under a different regional manager while the investigation concluded, minimizing any direct interaction with Richard during this sensitive period. Denise would continue serving as an informal point of contact, given her earlier involvement in supporting both women through the process. Over the following days, Maria noticed subtle shifts in the office atmosphere. Conversations seemed to quiet whenever she walked past certain groups of colleagues, though she couldn't always tell if people were discussing the investigation or simply their usual work matters. Richard, for his part, seemed noticeably subdued during team meetings, his usual easy charm replaced by a more guarded, careful demeanor. One afternoon, as Maria was leaving a meeting with her temporary new manager, she ran into Alicia from client relations near the elevators, the same colleague who had been at the airport during the original trip. "Hey, can we talk for a second?" Alicia asked, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "Of course," Maria said, stepping to the side of the busy hallway. "I heard through the grapevine that there's some kind of investigation involving Richard," Alicia said carefully. "I don't want to pry into details that aren't my business, but I wanted you to know, if it's connected to what I think it might be connected to, you're not the only one who noticed something off about him." Maria studied Alicia's face, unsure how much she should share. What do you mean? A few years ago, before you joined the team, there was a rumor about him making a similar comment to someone in accounting, Alicia said, lowering her voice further. I never knew if it was true, and it never went anywhere formally, but people talked about it quietly for a while before it just sort of faded away. Maria felt a chill settle over her, imagining how many years this pattern might have continued unnoticed, unreported, simply because previous incidents had faded into forgotten office gossip, rather than formal complaints with proper documentation. Thank you for telling me, Maria said. I can't really discuss specifics right now, but I appreciate you sharing that. I figured you should know you're not imagining things, whatever's going on, Alicia said, offering a small, supportive smile before heading toward her own meeting. That evening, Maria relayed the conversation to Denise, who promised to pass the information along to Nadia discreetly, in case it helped establish an even longer timeline for Richard's pattern of behavior. Denise also mentioned that 2 more employees had come forward independently that week, their stories following remarkably similar patterns to Maria and Grace's original accounts. As the investigation deepened, Maria found herself reflecting more and more on how close she had come to staying silent entirely. If she hadn't happened to sit down with Grace in the kitchenette that Wednesday afternoon, if Grace hadn't felt safe enough to share her own experience, this pattern might have continued indefinitely, hidden beneath layers of individual silence and quiet workarounds. She thought often about the other employees who had simply arranged their own separate rooms without reporting anything, just as she initially considered doing. She wondered how many of them had spent nights lying awake, questioning whether they had overreacted, wondering if speaking up would make them seem difficult or ungrateful for career opportunities. She recognized her own earlier hesitation in their silence, understanding deeply why so many had chosen not to come forward until now. Nearly 3 weeks after the initial meeting with Nadia, Maria received a message asking her to attend a follow-up meeting, this time including a representative from the legal department alongside Nadia. Grace was there again as well, though this time her expression seemed calmer, more settled than during their earlier meetings. We've completed our full investigation, Nadia began, once everyone had taken their seats. Given the pattern of behavior uncovered, including multiple corroborating accounts spanning nearly 2 years, along with Richard's own admissions during our conversations, the company has made a decision regarding his continued employment. Maria held her breath, waiting. Richard Kell's employment with the company will be terminated, effective immediately, Nadia said clearly. This decision was made following a thorough review by senior leadership, human resources, and legal counsel, based on a substantiated pattern of inappropriate conduct that violated multiple company policies. The room fell quiet for a moment, as the weight of the announcement settled over everyone present. Maria felt a complex wave of emotions rising within her, relief mixed with something like grief, not for Richard specifically, but for the entire situation, the months of quiet discomfort so many employees had carried, the careers that had been shadowed by uncertainty and fear of speaking up. What about the other people he supervised? Grace asked quietly. Will they know why this happened? We'll be communicating a general statement to affected teams, Nadia explained, without disclosing specific personal details about individual complainants, to protect everyone's privacy, including yours. The message will simply confirm that a violation of company policy was found and addressed appropriately. Thank you, Maria said softly, though the words felt inadequate for everything that had unfolded over the past month. No, thank you, Nadia said, her tone warm and genuine. Both of you showed remarkable courage coming forward, especially given the professional risk that can sometimes feel attached to reporting a supervisor's behavior. Because of your willingness to speak up and Grace's willingness to follow soon after, several other employees found the courage to share their own experiences as well. This outcome protects not just the 2 of you, but everyone who might have worked with Richard in the future. As they left the meeting, Grace turned to Maria with an expression that mixed relief with something close to disbelief. I honestly didn't think it would actually lead to this, she admitted. I kept preparing myself for nothing to happen, for him to just get a warning and go right back to normal. Me too, honestly, Maria said. I think I was so used to hearing stories where nothing changes, I forgot it was even possible for something like this to actually work the way it's supposed to. Denise, waiting for them near the elevators, offered a warm smile as they approached. "How do you both feel?" "Relieved," Grace said. "Exhausted, but relieved." Maria nodded in agreement, though her mind was already turning toward the future, toward questions of what would happen next for her career, for the department, for the culture of the workplace moving forward. She had no way of knowing yet that this experience would soon reshape not just her understanding of her own courage, but the trajectory of her entire career within the company. For now, though, she allowed herself simply to feel the relief of the moment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that speaking up, despite every fear and hesitation along the way, had ultimately led somewhere meaningful. Word of Richard's departure spread through the office within a single day, though exactly as Nadia had promised. The official communication remained vague, mentioning only a violation of company policy, without naming specific individuals involved. Still, in an office where whispers traveled faster than official memos, most employees seemed to understand, in broad terms, what had happened, even if the specific details remained unclear to many. Maria noticed a subtle shift in how some colleagues treated her over the following weeks. A few, like Carla from accounting, seemed to look at her with a kind of quiet respect whenever their paths crossed, though nothing was ever said directly. Others avoided the topic entirely, perhaps uncomfortable with the idea that a workplace they had considered safe and professional had harbored this kind of pattern for years without consequence. Grace, meanwhile, seemed to grow more confident with each passing week, no longer the nervous, uncertain new hire Maria had first noticed sitting alone in the kitchenette. She began speaking up more often in meetings, contributing ideas with a newfound assurance that Maria suspected had been quietly building beneath the surface all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. About a month after Richard's departure, Maria was called into a meeting with senior leadership, this time including the vice president of operations, a composed and thoughtful woman named Farah Aziz, who Maria had only met briefly during large company events. "I wanted to speak with you personally," Farah began, once Maria had settled into her seat, "to thank you for your role in bringing this issue to light. I know it wasn't an easy decision, and I know there was real professional risk involved in coming forward the way you did." "Thank you," Maria said, still slightly unsure why she had been called into such a high-level meeting. "I just felt like it was the right thing to do, especially once I learned it wasn't only happening to me." That kind of clarity and courage is exactly what we want to encourage within this organization, Farah said, "which is part of why I wanted to speak with you directly. We're creating a new position within the company, focused specifically on travel policy compliance and employee protection during business trips. Given everything that's happened, and given your first-hand understanding of where our previous policies fell short, we think you'd be an excellent fit to help shape and lead this role." Maria blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the unexpected offer. "You want me to lead a new department?" "Not quite a full department yet," Farah clarified, smiling slightly at Maria's surprised expression, "but a meaningful new role, reporting directly to senior leadership, focused on reviewing and strengthening our policies around business travel, accommodations, and employee safety more broadly. We want clearer guidelines in place, better reporting channels, and a stronger culture around this issue moving forward, and we think someone who's lived through the gaps in our previous system would bring invaluable perspective to fixing them." Maria sat with the offer for a moment, considering everything that had led to this moment, the uncomfortable phone call before her trip, the tense exchange at the hotel front desk, the quiet conversation with Grace in the kitchenette, the weeks of uncertainty during the investigation. She had never imagined, throughout any of it, that the experience might eventually open a new professional path entirely. "I'd like to accept," Maria said finally, feeling a swell of something like pride, mixing with the lingering weight of everything the past 2 months had involved. "I think there's a lot we could improve, not just around this specific issue, but around how comfortable employees feel reporting concerns in general." "Wonderful," Farah said, clearly pleased. "We'll set up a proper transition plan over the coming weeks. In the meantime, I'd also like to loop in Grace, if she's interested, to assist with initial policy drafts. Her perspective as someone newer to the company could offer valuable insight into how these policies read and feel to employees just starting out." Maria smiled at the mention of Grace's name. grateful that her colleague's contribution was being recognized alongside her own. I think she'd be glad to help. Over the following months, Maria threw herself into her new role, with a determination that surprised even her. She worked closely with HR to draft clearer, more specific travel policies, ensuring separate accommodations were guaranteed by default for all employees, regardless of gender or seniority, unless an employee specifically requested otherwise for their own comfort. She helped establish a more transparent reporting system, designed to make it easier and less intimidating for employees to raise concerns about supervisors or colleagues without fear of career consequences. She also worked with the training department to develop a brief but clear orientation module for new managers, outlining appropriate boundaries during business travel and reinforcing the company's commitment to employee comfort and safety. It wasn't a perfect solution, she knew, and policies alone couldn't guarantee good behavior from every person in a position of authority, but she hoped it would make situations like the one she and Grace had experienced far less likely to happen again, and far easier to report quickly if they did. Grace, true to Farah's suggestion, became deeply involved in the policy development process, offering valuable feedback from the perspective of someone still relatively new to corporate culture. The two women grew close over these months, their shared experience forming the foundation of what became a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after Richard's departure, Maria found herself training a new hire named Olivia, a bright-eyed young woman fresh out of college, eager and nervous in equal measure as she navigated her first few weeks at the company. During a quiet moment between training sessions, Olivia mentioned an upcoming business trip she had been assigned to, her first time traveling for work. "I'm a little nervous," Olivia admitted. "I've never really traveled for a job before. What if something feels weird or uncomfortable and I don't know how to handle it?" Maria smiled gently, recognizing a flicker of her own earlier uncertainty reflected in Olivia's words. If something ever feels off during a trip, trust that instinct completely. Don't wait for permission from anyone else to trust your own judgment, and know that this company has clear channels now for reporting anything that makes you uncomfortable, no matter how small it might seem at first. "Has something like that happened here before?" Olivia asked curiously. Maria considered how much to share, mindful of confidentiality, but also wanting to offer Olivia something honest and useful. "Let's just say the policies you'll be following were built directly from real experiences, mine included. If something feels wrong, it usually is, and speaking up matters more than you might think in the moment." Olivia nodded slowly, seeming to absorb the weight of Maria's words. "Thank you for telling me that. It actually makes me feel a lot better about the trip." "You're going to do great," Maria said warmly. "And if anything ever feels uncertain, you know exactly where to find me." As Olivia headed off to her next training session, Maria found herself reflecting on the long journey from that uncomfortable late-night phone call to this quiet, meaningful moment of guidance with a new employee. She thought about Grace, about Denise's steady support throughout the entire process, about Nadia's careful handling of the investigation, and about Farah's willingness to transform a difficult situation into a genuine opportunity for lasting change within the company. She thought, too, about the version of herself who had almost stayed silent that first night, who had almost convinced herself that Richard's request was simply normal, simply practical, simply something she needed to accept without question in order to succeed professionally. She was deeply grateful that instinct, however uncertain and quiet at first, had ultimately guided her toward speaking up rather than staying silent. Standing near the window of her new office later that afternoon, watching the city stretch out below her, Maria allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection on everything that had changed since that first uncomfortable phone call. She had walked into this company as an ambitious young professional, eager to prove herself through hard work and results. She hadn't expected that proving herself would eventually mean standing firm in an uncomfortable moment, trusting her own judgment against pressure from someone in a position of authority over her. But she understood now, more clearly than ever, that true professional courage sometimes had little to do with impressive presentations or closed client deals, and everything to do with the quiet, difficult decision to trust your own instincts, even when doing so felt risky, even when doing so meant standing alone for a little while, before finding others willing to stand beside you. She closed her laptop that evening, the office slowly emptying around her as colleagues headed home for the day, and allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead in her new role, she felt confident, for the first time in a long while, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing work that mattered, built from an experience that had once felt like nothing more than a single uncomfortable night before an important business trip.